On a cool and rainy August day, the National Warplane Museum of Geneseo, New York held its annual Wings of Eagles Air Show. The day may have been cloudy, but the spirits were high for both young and old as a regular procession of World War I and II aircraft made their way past all viewers. Many of the attendees looked back in time to a day when they were a part of aviation's history. For some, that history was little more than a year ago. For others, over half a century.
The Fighters. While all the great planes of World War II performed sterling service, it was the fighters that best demonstrated mastery of the skies. Operating at the very limits of the airframe, the engine, and the pilot, they were the elite. They were the thoroughbreds of airplanes. To them fell the dangerous and demanding task of finding the enemy wherever he might be and destroying him and his equipment. Whether in aerial combat or on low-level runs against railroads, bridges, airfields, or troops, it was always the same for the fighters. Surprise your opponent, hit him a slashing blow, and then run from the scene. Listen to what retired General Robin Olds, a fighter ace in both World War II and Korea, has to say about this kind of flyer.
Fighter pilot is an attitude. It is cockiness. It is aggressiveness. It is self-confidence. It is a streak of rebelliousness, and it is competitiveness. There's something else. There's a spark. There's a desire to be good, to do well in the eyes of your peers. And I think it is love of that blue vault of sky that becomes your playground. If, and only if, you're a fighter pilot. You don't understand it if you're flying from A to B in straight and level. You're merely climb and descend. You're moving through the basement of that vault of blue. A fighter pilot is a man in love with flying. A fighter pilot sees not a cloud, but beauty. Not the ground, but something remote from him. Something that he doesn't belong to as long as he's airborne. He's a man who wants to be second best to no one.
Thus it was that these aircraft became famous for striking lightning lethal blows that collectively changed the course of the combat and helped write history. As remarkable as the aircraft was the fact that when World War II began, few existed that were a true match for what the enemy had to face. It was only through the incredible dedication of the men and women of industries in the Allied nations that the powerful, sleek fighters came into being and were produced in the tens of thousands to overwhelm our adversaries. So it is that we owe the life and strength of our own great nation to those who flew and built the fighters.
Far spacious skies, far amber waves of grain, far purple mountain majesties. But now wait a minute, I'm talking about America, sweet America.
Taxiing through in front of us right now on the taxiway are the participants in our World War I reenactment. In the lead, an SE-5A. Following that, a Fokker D-7. And behind that, the Fokker DR-1. The Red Baron's triplane. DR-1 stands for Dreidecker. 3, Dreidecker. German word. 3-winger. Tell you a little bit more about them when they get in the air. They're probably going to simulate a little dogfight for you and show you what it was like in World War II. And our World War I aircraft are now launched and in the air. These are all replicas of World War I fighter-type aircraft. And really nice replicas, I might add, that are maintained by a group called the Great War Flying Museum from up somewhere around Brampton, Ontario in Canada. The aircraft that you're seeing in this World War I demonstration here today, again, are replicas. They are not the original airplanes. But they are, the first airplane is the, of course, famous Red Baron airplane, the triplane. That's called a DR-1, built by Fokker. Originally, it had a Laron rotary engine in it of 110 horsepower. They're not using that type engine in it today because, again, this is a replica. It only weighs about 1,290 pounds fully loaded and was armed with a couple of machine guns, of course, capable of doing at maximum 103 miles an hour. The fuselage is a welded steel tube fuselage on that airplane, and the wings, as you'll notice, don't have any bracing in them. This airplane had an incredible rate of climb, though. It could match the Sopwith Camel in just about any maneuver, but it wasn't as fast, and that was probably its undoing. It also is a very unstable and difficult squirrely. Forget unstable, it's a squirrely airplane. Only 320 of these were ever built originally. Of course, the most famous pilot was the Red Baron and Manfred von Richthofen, who shot down his first aircraft September 17th of 1916, and he had shot down 80 by April 20th of 1918, and the very next day, he was shot down in combat with Sopwith Camels of the RAF and died. The aircraft in the show is from the Great War Flying Museum up in Brampton, and as we said a little bit ago, the DR-1 in its designation is for Dreidecker, which is the German word for three-winged aircraft, Dreidecker. Also out there today and painted bright blue and red is a Fokker D-7 replica. The Fokker D-7 originally had a BMW inline engine of about 210 horsepower, 6-cylinder engine, and it was water-cooled. Another airplane that was used extensively, it was the toughest combat plane in World War I, built by Fokker. Got into service in 1918. It was feared because of its maneuvering ability. German pilots would climb steeply with it and attack their opponent from below. It has, as you'll see when it comes over, a very thick cantilever wing. It had incredible performance even at 20,000 feet because of that wing. The replica that's here today, and again, it's the one that'll be blue and red, is in the markings of the 6th highest ranking German pilot in World War I, who had 44 confirmed kills. The SE-5A replica, the SE-5A built by the Royal Aircraft Factory, originally built by Austin Motor Car, though, as a matter of fact. It was the Allies' premier fighter of World War I, rivaled only by the Sopwith Camel. Very stable, and they say great pleasure to fly. Capable at max of 126 miles an hour. You're going to hear us from time to time today talk about the maximum speed of an airplane. That is a speed that the airplane can achieve only for the briefest of periods, probably pointed nose down, carrying all your personal possessions in the airplane. Slightly over that speed, the wings come off, and you are now in a telephone pole with a seat on it. So maximum speed of an airplane is a little tricky thing.
I think the gentleman has a brake hanging up. That straight down speed is called God, that's a scary speed. cruising around at 2,500 feet, looking at airplanes as well. We're driving
Now we are looking at the little guys. These were the training liaison aircraft that performed a variety of roles that were critical to the military mission. These aircraft were just as much a part of the success of the combined Allied air forces as their bigger armed brothers. Consider that by the year 1941, before the entry of the United States into World War II, U.S. aircraft factories were outproducing both Germany and Japan. Many of the early American planes were combat types built under the Lend-Lease program for England and France. That early contract production enabled U.S. manufacturers to train workers and build the facilities that would later become absolutely essential. While the U.S. factories were arming the French and the British, they were also assembling fleets of training aircraft for their expected roles. In the 1940s, the U.S. civilian pilot training program was created to provide qualified candidates for the military air services. After the war started, American pilots were able to train in the relative comfort and safety of new airfields built in the United States and Canada, far away from hostilities. These pilots were to become the backbone of a combined Allied Air Force that was to become so effective in the offensive campaigns of 1943, 44, and 45. The German Air Force had been trained in the 1930s. Many of their best pilots grew up in gliders, but the Germans were to have heavy combat losses of experienced pilots on the eastern, western, and southern fronts. They were unable to conduct training in a safe, sheltered environment. Fuel limitations were imposed on the German training operations, so a new pilot might be introduced into combat with less than 100 hours in the air. Despite their many exceptional aircraft designs, the German Air Force was decimated by 1944. The same situation occurred in the Pacific Theater. The Japanese were unable to bring enough qualified pilots into battle. By 1943, the United States had committed a terrific amount of economic might to producing military aircraft, but this productive capacity could only be useful if there were qualified pilots available to fly them. Tens of thousands of airmen graduated from the U.S. military training bases to fly the millions of combat missions that won the war.
You'll notice when the fighters take off here that you have a real variance in aircraft. You have a good idea of the different thoughts in mind when it came to building fighter aircraft. You have the single-engine Corsair with the air-cooled radial engine in it, very strong aircraft. You have the P-51 Mustang, very sleek, great high-altitude capabilities with a supercharged engine. Liquid-cooled V-12 Merlin. And then you had the P-38 with two Allison V-12 engines in it. The superchargers for those engines sit on top of the engine nacelles, just back of the engine. If you get a chance to get over there and you get to lean up and take a look at the top of those nacelles, you'll see like a little exhaust pipe sticking up, and that's where the superchargers are. Actually, that's a misnomer. Those aren't superchargers, they are turbochargers. They operate off the exhaust of the aircraft. The exhaust spins the wheel compresses the air and forces more air into the engine, also more fuel. The higher the altitude, the less and thinner the air is, so you need to compress the air and force more air into the engine. That's where these turbochargers and superchargers came into effect. The P-51, when it was first designed, started with an Allison engine. It was a good airplane, but they realized for high altitude work and for speed, they needed more power. So eventually the Merlin engine was added, a lot more power, great high altitude capabilities, and made them one of the top fighters of World War II. And of course, one of the favorite fighters for all the warbird pilots today. You'll notice on that P-38, if you can spy it there, that one propeller is going to the right and one propeller is going to the left. Obviously, that means one engine is rotating backwards in comparison to the other engine. One of the reasons for doing this is it counteracts torque. if both engines are turning the same way, when you power up to take off, it makes the airplane want to twist. And the Corsair. 18 cylinders, R2800s. You'll notice the wing design in the Corsair, how the wings are bent and the Gall design. That had nothing to do with the flying characteristics of the airplane. That was designed to get the fuselage up and get more propeller clearance.
They were the aces who flew in World War I, or the doughboys who endured the hell on earth of the trenches. They were the World War II GIs who inched their way to victory. The air and ground crews who kept our bombers, our fighters, our L-birds and transports going against all odds and against all dangers. They flew supersonic jets and endured the biting cold in Korea, or at the controls of helicopters and in the steaming jungles in Vietnam. They went in peace to Beirut only to die at the hands of terrorists. Some were men and women who liberated Grenada and went ashore in Panama, or the soldiers and sailors and Marines who served, fought, and died in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Iraq during Operation Desert Storm. We salute our fallen comrades in the traditional flyer's way, with an aircraft leaving a vacant slot in a formation. A reminder of those who never came back from that last mission, those who paid the supreme sacrifice. Like all of us, they loved and were loved. They marveled at the dawn. They felt sunsets glow. They loved life so much that they were willing to put theirs on the line in the hope that the rest of us would not have to do that. Most of all, they did it to honor this great country of ours, so that we could stand here today and breathe this sweet, precious air of freedom. To them, each and every one, we dedicate our Missing Man formation.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to start scanning the skies, because headed your way, right to left, for the first time since 1948, in formation, together in an air show act, 4 P-51 Mustangs. Their debut before an air show audience right here for you at Batavia, the Four Horsemen. In the lead airplane, big beautiful doll, is Ed Shipley. Right tucked on the wing of him is Frenessy with young Jim Beasley. On the other wing is Dan Calderall, and the airplane that has just split out of the formation is the solo pilot. His name is Vlad Olenek. Ed, Jim, and Dan are originally from down in the Philadelphia area. Vlado's from leave right around Chicago. They just did their diamond formation pass for you. And once again, we tell you that the gentlemen are really just sort of practicing here today. You'll notice that some of their turns are quite long. It's also going to be a little difficult to see them for a time when they're out in the haze. But if you look off to the left-hand side, watch as Vlad Olenek brings Moonbeam McSwine back toward us. And he will be doing a barrel roll in solo. And he's diving back down toward the field from the left-hand side, gaining speed, pushing up somewhere around 300, 350 miles an hour with that V12 liquid-cooled Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. Here we go, the barrel roll solo. Watch this, an old air show maneuver. Pull that nose up and just roll her out to the side. Nice and easy. Not having fun or anything. We had a hard time getting him in the airplane this morning. He said, oh, gee, I don't know if I want to fly a P-51. Okay, we're going to recover the 4 horsemen again. Now, as they land, they're going to be a little busy because somewhere as they get right down in there, they're just coming down through 110 or so, heading on down to around 90. So they're going a little fast when they put this thing on the ground. They're a little busy until they get it slowed down somewhat. But you can still give them a wave as they go by, certainly, even though they may not be able to wave back. And by the way, after that 14 or 15 minutes of flying in formation, these guys are hot and sweaty in there. That's an airplane where you can really get very, very warm, very, very quick on a hot day, and especially down at low level. And just the strain of doing the aerobatics, when they fly that formation where they have one guy in the lead and 2 guys following him, the 2 guys in back quite literally are looking at his airplane and not looking out where they're going. They go where he goes. And the strain of doing that as a pilot is immense, no doubt about it. In fact, Jamie Beasley in that particular aircraft that just rolled through the center here was telling me last night that he probably lost a couple of pounds during practice each time. And he doesn't have a lot to lose in the way of poundage anyhow. There's Dan Calderon flying Baby Duck today. And as we recover the last of our P-51s, we're getting set to launch our Stearmans and et cetera. And ladies and gentlemen, on the runway and doing their run-ups and their checks are some of our other trainers, the Stearmans and the Tiger Moths. These are another type of trainer that was used during World War II, and we're going to tell you a little bit about those. In the lead will be our Stearmans. The Stearman is probably one of the best recognized biplanes, even by people who aren't really into airplanes like some of us are. It is a 2-place open cockpit biplane. That means it has 2 wings. It was designed and first built in 1936 by Lloyd Stearman out in Wichita. It was only a couple of years later that he sold the whole works to Boeing, and in fact, most of the airplanes that we call Stearmans are really Boeings. Let's let them get off the ground here, and then we'll talk about them a little more. Okay, the last of our Stearmans is off. Here come the Tiger Moths, and again, we'll tell you a little more about them when they do their flybys, just what they are. They're airplanes, but I mean beyond that. As you might imagine, the guys that fly these have a great deal of fun because of the, just the nature of the airplane. It's nice and slow, and you're down low, and you can see things. Stearmans originally cost the U.S. government about $11,000. You'll be real lucky if you can buy one of them today for less than $80 in good shape. 7-cylinder, 220-horse Continental engine up front, radial engine. The cylinders arranged in a circle, and it's all air-cooled. The books say that the thing can do 125 miles an hour as a maximum speed, and we all laugh heartily when we read that, because the actual speed on this airplane in cruise is somewhere in the 60 to 80 mile an hour range.
You'll see them when they land, see the rudder kick around from sky to sky. And just try to keep it in a straight line and get it back to the parking area. Steer it, steer it until it's chained to the ground.
Okay, in the gloom, off to your right. Landing lights on. Black smoke trails coming out the back. Okay, he's all lined up, ready to have a go at it. Here he comes once more over your heads. The C-141 Starlifter. Take a look just on either side of the fuselage along the back. You'll see the little doors open. If you have real good eyes, you might see some guy's head poking out of there. That's where the jumpers are going to be coming from. And again, let's watch and listen. The C-141 Starlifter. There's the first guy away. And they are jumping with the World War II type chutes. Boy, there are a bunch of them out there. Now, as soon as the airplane gets away from the area and the noise dies down a little bit, these guys up there in the air, if you do this right, will be able to hear how much you appreciate what they've done because they can hear you. How about a lot of noise for our Navy SEALs and our Marines on the jump today? They're probably going, what the heck are all these people doing down here? Now, the problem with these parachutes, as you can see, is that they're about as maneuverable as a kitchen sink. That is one of the things about them. The wind tends to carry them around with this type of canopy. They are steerable to a degree, but generally you go where it goes. And in true military parlance, he is not just at 4,000 feet. He has informed us he is at 4,780 feet. Okay, so I put those few more feet on there. Notice the green smoke out front. That's the marker that they're going to try to aim for. Watch again at the back of the airplane. Along the sides where you saw the jumpers exit before. And very shortly we should start seeing airplanes. There they come. I count 2 good canopies. Now the problem they're going to have today is this wind you feel here at the surface is probably nothing compared to what they're running into up there where they are. So they're gradually going to have to work their way around and try to get back down here and then cope with the wind at ground level. It's also probably pretty cool up there where they are. As a standard drop rate in the temperature is about 3 degrees for every 1,000 feet you go up in the air. They can, if they wish, swing the whole rig around with them hanging out from the back of it like a pendulum and come straight down at the ground with the chute and them pointed straight at the ground to lose a lot of altitude real quick. You see this one guy in the lower of the 2 shooters. He, in fact, is doing what I was talking about a while ago. He said, okay, it's enough fooling around. I'm going to get on down closer to the ground. Okay, I believe now, ladies and gentlemen, that these 2 fellows are surely going to be able to hear you, but again, it depends on how much noise you make. How about a big welcome for our next 2 shooters here at the Wings of Eagles Air Show? And as he continues on out to make his next pass, let's tell you about the airplanes taxiing in front of him. The first airplane is a C-45, military version of the Beech 18, twin engine, 450 horsepower aside, almost entirely metal, a light utility transport. Right behind that is Claire Potter and his variant of the C-45. This is a bombardier trainer, an AT-11, Kansas. It's one of the very few of these on the show circuit. And it has the glassed-in nose, it has the Norden bomb sight in it, and they dropped 100-pound sand-filled bags of bombs, that is, out of this airplane to train bombardiers. Behind that is a Canadian version of the then Cessna civilian T-50 here in the United States, powered by a couple of Jacobs radials, made with quite a lot of wood, quite a bit of fabric. Because it had so much wood in it, even though in the United States the thing was called the UC-78 was the designation, they called it a lot of times the Rhapsody in Glue. Right behind them are BT-13s. That's Max Marion in the lead. He's from out in Ohio. Right behind him in the BT-13 is the fellow that was talking to you a little while ago up here, Kenny Moses. It's an airplane he and his brother own and is based at the museum. This is a basic trainer that was used during World War II. See, Kenny's going to come over here and take a bow or something, probably. Yeah. There you go. And here's the C-141 once again. And that's him saying, see how well I can handle this airplane with all the landing gear and all the flaps hanging out. Lieutenant Colonel Ron Gertzen, thank him for being here with us today. Right behind us, a couple of Yales. And this is a trainer that was made and used primarily up in Canada. They're very much like the AT-6 you'll see later on, except it has a 400 horsepower engine in it instead of 6. Now the crane that is flying here, as I said, is that's the yellow one with the twin engines down there on the ramp, on the runway right now, ready to go. Each of those engines are 245 horsepower. This was originally a Cessna twin, the very first one they ever built. T-50 it was called. It had a lot of names in addition to what I told you a while ago, the Rhapsody in Glue, they call it, because so much wood in it, wood in tube steel frame and covered in fabric. But it was also known as the Bobcat here in the States. Up in Canada, it was known as the Crane, and that's what this one was. And because it was designated UC-78 here in the States, they also called it the Useless 78 sometimes. Variety of variants on this one, the AT-8, AT-17. Let's get them off the ground. I'm going to let you listen to the sound of these engines because they all have a slightly different sound. Here we go. The Yales are an airplane that was used extensively in Canada, fixed gear version with a smaller engine of the T-6, built by North American. The flaps in that airplane, by the way, are operated by a hand crank. It is fully aerobatic and has good short field performance. There are only about 7 Yales still flying in the world today. It's about 1,000 pounds lighter than the T-6 and has said 440 horsepower engine. Pilots today, I know one of them is Murray Cott, and the other I'm not really sure. I believe it might be Fergus Kyle from the CWH, but I'm not really sure. Back taxiing now. are our trainers from a later era. The ones you were seeing flying before you as trainers, the Yales and the BT-13s, are basic trainers. That was like the middle step in the training scheme during World War II. Later on, they got into just calling them trainers. They did away with the PT, BT, and AT designations. And then you got into airplanes such as these. Now these, the lead 3 aircraft are what we call T-28 Trojans. And the one at the trail end is a T-34. The numbers simply mean where they came after they started using Ts. Somewhere back there was probably a T1 type that wasn't used or something, because I don't remember seeing it. Comes that beautiful Canadian C-45 again. The T-28s that are here today, I believe, are all D models. There were some early models made that had like 800 horsepower, but virtually all of them out here have been converted to 1,425 horsepower. They may be C models actually that are here, but anyway. This is an airplane that weighs about 7,800 pounds. And although most of them were used only as trainers, some of them were armed with 50 calibers and underwing pods, and also 200 pounds of bombs or rockets, and used in the Vietnam era as an attack aircraft, a ground attack aircraft. It was a single-engine low-wing trainer. First flew in 1949 and was a replacement for the AT-6 Texan. The cockpit of the T-28 is laid out very much like that of a jet. The Trojans were used to help train pilots who were going to transition up to jet aircraft, so they made it a lot like a jet. It also was the last prop-driven trainer that was used by the Air Force, and about 2,000 of them were made. The pilots we're expecting this year: Bob Berenger from Rochester, New Hampshire, Bruce McRitchie from the Canadian Warplane Heritage, and I believe Jeff Kleiman's airplane. I'm not sure exactly who the other one is from, but we'll find out for you and pass that along. Big radial engines in them, whereas the T-34 has a Continental opposed 6-cylinder engine in it of about 225 horsepower. That's the yellow and white airplane. Some of them did get converted to 285 horsepower. And that's an airplane that's capable of about 189 miles an hour max. You'll notice the T-28s are going to be a lot faster than the T-34. It's interestingly enough, the T-34 you're going to see is based on the Beechcraft Bonanza, the one with the V-tail and later with the straight tail. And it was called the Mentor. As the T-28 is called the Trojan, the T-34 was called the Mentor. It was served with the Air Force and the Navy and also a bunch of foreign countries. And the Navy was still using a few of them powered by a turboprop engine. The last ones, in fact, the T-34s, were made and delivered to the Navy in August of 1990. Over 1,900 made. Glenn Goldman, who lists Falls Church, Virginia, as his home, is flying that airplane today. The B-52 bomber. 8 turbofan engines of 13,750 pounds thrust each. Although later ones, the G models, had 17,000 pound thrust engines. Has a wingspan of 185 feet, 160 feet long. Weighs 400,000 pounds max. It's capable of going 650 miles an hour, and first went into service in April of 1952, and is still one of our frontline defensive forces. The B-52 bomber. Today, many of them have been converted to launch cruise missiles. But some of the most spectacular things they've ever done have been mostly dropping iron bombs.
Special weapons lock indicators indicate unlocked. RCD connected, lights on. Brick is select, release light off. Master round control switch, master pump control switch on, light on. Pumping system switch, pumping system switch auto. Bow door control valve off, tested.
You are listening to the B-52 crew inbound right now as if they were preparing for a bomb run.
Countdown. Seconds.
That was direct from the airplane to you, the B-52 Stratofortress. And that's what they go through in that airplane when they go to drop bombs. Originally, that airplane cost $7 million, by the way, for the government. Can carry about 70,000 pounds of mixed ordnance. That means up to 20 cruise missiles. Later models also could carry about 750 pounds of bombs, 750-pound bombs, I mean, but not just a few of them. They could carry 105 750-pound bombs. That's a weight of 78,000 pounds, by the way, for those of you who are adding that up. Some of them had 50 caliber machine guns on the tail earlier. That was later replaced with a Gatling gun. Mostly, though, it's not a very heavily armed airplane because the whole idea was it was to be able to fly up high and fly a long ways. Unrefueled range on the B-52 is about 8,800 miles. Well, then we're just going to move it right along here. And we have a treat for you now. We're going to go into what we call our flight of the foes here. And this is a mixed bag of aircraft of the type that were used by the enemy during World War II. And even after that, as a matter of fact. Try to call them out for you as they take off here. And in this group, as I said, now those of you who saw them taxi down in front here, you said, gee, there are two Zeros in there. One of those is a replica of the Zero that was built for the movie Tora, 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 and it's based on the T-6 Texan. But the other is, in fact, a real Zero. First off the ground, though, with this flight is going to be Reg Hirschler in the P-51 Gunfighter from Bellevue, Nebraska. I lied. It's not him, it's Jimmy. They slipped a Mickey to me. It's Jimmy Beasley in Fennessy. Boy, I tell you, these guys change things all the time just to see if I'm paying attention. Did you see that? Now this one I won't make a mistake on. This is the ME-108, built by Messerschmitt. A wonderful restoration. Right behind him, the Yak-18. Actually, the Chinese version of the Yak-18. And another of our Yak-18s taken off here today. We have two of those with us. Kenny Williamson in a replica of a Kate torpedo bomber of the type that was used in the attack on Pearl Harbor. This is based on a BT-13 and also is another airplane that was in the movie Tora, Tora, Tora. Airplane is owned by Skip Rawson from down in New Jersey. And behind him comes the first of our Zeros. Now I want you to compare that with the other airplane about to come down through here. You saw that one. And the other Zero now beginning his takeoff roll. And look at the difference between these two airplanes. And this is how you'll be able to tell the real one from the replica. That was the real one. You'll notice also that the rear of the fuselage is a little bit smaller on the real Zero. Here comes our Japanese delegation. Reg Hirschler in the, Doug Jackson in the replica is the guy that has those machine gun noises. That's nothing more than a spark plug at the end of a pipe fueled by propane with a trigger on the stick and a regulator, and it sounds just like a machine gun. Those Yak-18s that are flying out there are pretty interesting airplanes too. I'll tell you a little about them as Bob brings the ME-108 around once again. That sure is a beautiful restoration. Nice little airplane. A lot of years of work in that to get it to that condition. The Yaks that are coming through now, Yak-18s, powered by 9-cylinder radial, 285 horsepower. Built in the former Soviet Union, first back in 1945 and first flew in 46. They didn't get this engine that they're using now until somewhere around 1957. During the Korean War, Yak 18s were used by the North Koreans. The most famous of those is a fellow that they used to call Bed Check Charlie, who would fly over every night over the U.S. troops someplace, and they would all dive for the bunkers. They had to. And he would throw out, mind you, out of the airplane fragmentation bombs, which really it did no damage, just meant that nobody got any sleep. For 59 through the 60s, though, the Yak 18s were used in competition flying, and they scored pretty well a lot of times. What is this? We are under attack. That's the air raid siren. Spotters have said there is a Japanese Zero sneaking in for an attack on the field. The Zero, pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy, and what some say is the best pure dogfight plane in the world. We just saw Tranquility, but now people scramble for cover everywhere, jumping into air raid trenches, manning their anti-aircraft guns. Out of nowhere, the Zero screams by, the guns blazing right at Lieutenant Urschler in the Mustang as he pulls onto that runway defenseless. The Mustang scrambles down the runway, barely avoiding the Zero's bullets, and the dogfight is on. Once again, the Mustang climbing for altitude, but so is the Zero. Each trying to get on the other guy's tail. That's the ideal position. Wax his tail if you can. Reg decides to convert the altitude to speed, but the Zero's coming down too. The Zero's shooting, but he isn't shooting at Reg. He's coming up behind him. He's going to get in that ideal position. Keep an eye on the P-51 really hauling down through there after that dive. Closing on that Zero. And he turns inside him. Can he get him? Ladies and gentlemen, smoke out the back of the Zero. I believe he might have been hit. Once again, Reg Urschler coming right up after him, trying to get that position, diving way down in there. Zero still shooting at us. Little does he know he's got a serious problem coming up behind him. And once again, smoke from the Zero. Over the top, a lot of smoke this time. Urschler sticking right with him in the P-51 Mustang. But I think we have a Zero pilot in a whole lot of trouble here. He's still shooting. He just doesn't know when he's done, does he? Smoke coming out of your fighter airplane is not the kind of thing you want to see. Once again, turning back, that Zero trying to shake him, but Urschler's sticking right with him now. So you can't get away from me. A lot of smoke coming out of the Zero. Zero climbing, trying to get away from him. Banks it off to the right. They break it off. It looks like the Zero is in big trouble as Reg Owen pulls the victory roll. Ladies and gentlemen, scratch 1-0. I should tell you, by the way, that Doug Jackson was flying the Tora Zero 101 from out in Wichita, Kansas. This P-51 named Gunfighter is a 1944 model P-51. Reg Urschler from out in Nebraska is a retired brigadier general from the Air Force. He's been the sole sponsor of Gunfighter for 18 years and has flown before tens of millions of people at events all over North America. Of course, the P-51 was one of the most recognized of the planes during World War II. How about a big wave as Doug Jackson goes by in that Zero replica? Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to have a look off to the left. You see a little dot? Well, ladies and gentlemen, here it comes for you at the Wings of Eagles, the F-117A Stealth Fighter. Is that the strangest looking thing you ever saw? Captain Eddie Osteen of the U.S. Air Force from Hendersonville, North Carolina.
If you watch the pass from the right to the left, you'll see no visible signs of exhaust out the back of the airplane. No big hole in the back where the jet exhaust comes out. That is because the exhaust signature of the aircraft is spread across the entire tail surface of the airplane horizontally. And it prevents infrared from detecting the aircraft from underneath. The more they can dissipate that exhaust across the bigger area, the less detectable the aircraft. And this aircraft has no afterburner, which means it doesn't make all that racket when it climbs. They won't put afterburners on the airplane because they don't want to have that much fuel being burned out the back, once again, making it very visible to infrared. He'll give you a top view of it this time, I believe, from your right to your left. Ladies and gentlemen, the Stealth Fighter. If you notice, the bottom of the aircraft is also very, very clean. There are no mounts for bombs or rockets on the bottom. All internal stores on the aircraft are indeed that. They're internal. The bombs, the rockets, whatever the aircraft are going to use on that particular mission come out of the bottom of the airplane with doors that open up, almost like the landing gear does. You're taking a tight turn to the left, coming back in down runway 10.
You know what? He was only going to do 2 passes originally. He must like us a lot because he's going to give us a 3rd pass. Isn't that great? Captain Eddie Osteen coming back for pass number 3 in Saddam Hussein's nightmare.
Give him a wave. He can look out here and see you. And he'll pitch it up at this point. And he'll probably go off and join with a tanker to refuel. They do all the refueling in the air of that aircraft. Ladies and gentlemen, taking the active run right now is my favorite airplane, the Bearcat. F-8F Bearcat, flown by Howard Perdue, a very renowned test pilot. He flies the air races in Reno every year with this particular airplane. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the experimental Bearcat, a very early model. This airplane at one time was at the Smithsonian. And Howard had some aircraft Smithsonian wanted, and he wanted this one, so they made a trade. And last year and the year before, a few years before that, this airplane did race at Reno. This airplane is considered the fastest single-engine, piston-powered airplane that the United States ever built. The Bearcat, to this day, holds the time to climb record, which is standing start from a runway to a certain altitude, and if I gave you the altitude, I'd be lying, but I know it's in 96 seconds from a standing start to something like 13,000 feet or even higher. And the way they did that with Rare Bear, which is the Bearcat they use for racing only. And Lyle Sheldon gave a seminar at Oshkosh this year, and he told me they actually tied the tail down with a chain to the runway and a clevis with an electric solenoid on it. They fired the airplane up and went full throttle against that chain, at which time they pushed a button, the clevis pulled, and the airplane launched, just like coming off an aircraft carrier. And that's how he made his time to climb record. He went less than 200 feet, and he was airborne. So Howard's here today to demonstrate this aircraft for you. It's powered by an R2800 Pratt & Whitney engine. Wingspan of the airplane is only 35 feet, 28 feet 3 inches long. It's 13 feet 10 inches high. It weighs 7,000 pounds empty and 12,947 pounds gross weight. They use .450 caliber machine guns on the military version. Maximum speed for this airplane is 421 miles an hour. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we told you before, when they talk about maximum speed for these fighters or any of these aircraft, this is not level flight. This isn't a descent at wide open throttle. So the airplane is capable of going past 420 miles an hour. Average cruise speed at moderate power settings is about 163 miles an hour to 200. But the airplane is capable of climbing over 4,500 feet a minute. Those are jet speeds. This airplane was designed for carrier landings. That's why it sits so high. It's got a very tall stance on the gear, and you can notice the tail wheel sits up quite high. These airplanes were produced in '45. That's when they were first delivered to the Navy. The training in the airplane didn't begin until late '45. The Bearcat was actually the missing link between piston engine aircraft and jet fighters. This was actually the last of the frontline fighters ever built for military use before they went to jets. But came in production too late to be used too much in World War II. The modified Bearcat that's flown by Lyle Sheldon at the Reno Air Races every year has a bigger engine, a 3350. And that aircraft is capable of speeds down the straightaways at Reno Air Races exceeding 520 miles an hour. I believe that the course record was set by a Bearcat, and I believe it's that one rare bear of over 460 miles an hour for an average speed around a 7-mile course. So we're talking some serious speed here, ladies and gentlemen. Let's get up and go. And Howard is turning his base leg on a right base for 2-8. Air boss is cleared him to land. We would like to take a second and thank our air bosses up here, Rich Dave and Rod Gilman, Walt Edwards. These guys stay up here all day long in the sunshine, talk until they can't talk no more to keep all these guys in line and control our airspace for us, and they're doing a marvelous job. And we certainly want to thank all the volunteers that worked this weekend to put this on, but we'll do that later when we get a little more specific about it.
All right, let's talk about these C-47s that are coming down through here, Kenny. And the lead airplane is Jim Vosell from up in New Hampshire. Used to be painted in the Royal Canadian Air Force colors, but in honor of the 50th anniversary of D-Day this year, he painted it as a ship that flew at the invasion of Normandy, one of them. That's flown by Jim Vosell. Right behind that, from our friends at the Yankee Air Force, the C-47, first aircraft they ever restored. It's flown by Richard Bodycomb. They're based out in Belleville, Michigan. That's the second aircraft through. The third aircraft through is from our friends Canucks Unlimited. It's called the Canadian Warplane Heritage.
So everybody take away from Howard Perdue when he goes by. I'm sorry, Bill. I want to make sure people recognize.
Say hi to Howard out there, too. Coming behind that, an airplane we're really glad to have here because it's the first time in a long while that we've got our friends from Mid-Atlantic Air Museum in Reading, Pennsylvania with us. This is their R4D6, painted like one that served at the NAS Norfolk in 1945. Flown today by Russ Strine, or at least he was supposed to be flying it. And coming along right behind that, the National Warplane Museum's own version of the DC-3. This is an R4D5, a Navy version. Acquired in early 1993 from Air Manitoba. They were using it to haul fishermen. Ladies and gentlemen, the Goonie Birds.
Well, I'm especially proud to announce that the R4D is here this weekend. I am one of the privileged few people to have a type rating to fly that airplane. I got it this year, and it's one of the proudest moments of my life to get a type rating to fly that airplane. When you can actually say, I can fly a piece of history, and that is a piece of history right there, ladies and gentlemen. It's a very proud thing to accomplish. And I'll blow my own horn and say, I could fly that. That's nice.
Let me tell you, these airplanes last and stay together a long time. That one named Canucks Unlimited that's owned by the Canadian Warplane Heritage, it has the second highest time of any Goonie bird in the world. It has 82,000 hours on it and has flown 12 million miles. And it's still here today. Jamie Bradley going through in the A-26, by the way. He'll be flying with him, as will our B-25 Mitchells. A quick couple of things about the C-47s. As Kenny said, just a piece of history. First designed and built by Douglas in '35, it was to be the DC-3 commercial airliner, but many of them wound up being used by the military, or 10,000 of them, in fact. as glider tows, troop transport, ambulance, airborne troops, you name it. Originally cost about $138,000, and surprisingly today, still about the same. Right behind them on the grass taxiway come our B-25 Mitchells. And each of these has a tale to tell, too. The lead B-25, Hap, owned by Jeff Kleiman. And I believe being flown by either Gary Young or Bill Dodds. I believe Bill Dodds is flying that right now, Captain Bill Dodds. This airplane, named Hap, was the personal airplane of General Hap Arnold of the Air Force, the Army Air Force. It's a very, very old, one of the oldest B-25 still flying, as a matter of fact.
I think it's interesting to note, Bill, if you see that airplane coming at you, the airplane has what we call negative dihedral. If you notice most of the airplanes here, if you look at the wings at the airplane head on, the wings kind of tip up. And the B-25, they go up a little bit close to fuselage, then they kind of dip down the other way. Serves the same purpose, it's just a little different design. It has to do with the handling characteristics of the airplane.
Not only that, these engines are really romping, stomping engines. R2600s, which means 2,600 cubic inches, 1,700 horsepower on a side. Interestingly enough, this is the only military airplane that was ever named after a person, named after early air power advocate General Billy Mitchell, the Mitchell B-25.
For many years, we had our air show in Geneseo. We used the B-25 to do what we call a great pumpkin drop. We'd load the bomb bays full of pumpkins, send them up and get them center stage and have them drop the pumpkins out the bomb bays. This year, we're doing it with government officials.
We got a lot of people want to see that happen, yeah.
Boy, I knew I got a rise out of him with that, didn't I?
Flying.
I'm not going to say that over the mic, but.
Flying a B-25 named Yankee Lady from the Yankee Air Force is Don Harner. And in Hot Gen, the trail B-25 from the Canadian Warplane Heritage pilot is Brock Mason. So that's who is in those airplanes. The only other one we got to tell you about is the A-26. Let's do that. He's down at the far end of the runway. We're delighted to have him here with us. It's the first time this airplane has ever been to our air show. Our friends from the Canadian Warplane Heritage own that one. That's the one that taxied down on the hard surface, as he doesn't like to taxi around on the grass because of rather fragile landing gear on this airplane. The A-26 Invader was in service from 1944 to Vietnam. Best and last ground attack and tactical U.S. bomber during World War II. Was the fastest bomber the Americans put in the field. How fast? Maximum speed 373 miles an hour plus. Its cruise speed, a more realistic 260. Has a very high-speed wing on it, as you'll see. Powered by a couple of R2800s. 2 rows of 9 cylinders per engine. 18 radial engine cylinders of 2,000 plus horsepower a side. Interestingly enough, this C model with the transparent bomber nose served with the United States Air Force during the Korean War, but is now owned and flown by the Canadian Warplane Heritage. It's painted as one that served with the French Air Force and Indochina from 51 to 54. And again, James Bradley is the pilot.
There had never been anything like it before, and there never will again. June 6, 1944, 50 years ago, D-Day. Operation Overlord, the Allied invasion of Europe that was to spell the beginning of the end of Hitler's reign of terror. And the great planes you see before you now were a type that played a key role in that longest day. They were part of the greatest assault in history, one that saw 370,000 soldiers and sailors set out in 5,300 vessels across the English Channel. 11,000 airplanes made the same journey in the skies above that narrow stretch of water. Their destination, a rendezvous with history on the beaches of Normandy. They could not afford to fail. Defeat could mean a longer war.
Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusades toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you.
The night before, 16,000 American paratroopers had been dropped from the more than 800 planes, many of them C-47s. Another 8,000 British paratroopers dropped in to guard the eastern flank. One of the Americans, Private John Steele, landed on a church steeple and hung there playing dead for almost 2 hours before being taken captive by the Germans. Lieutenant Jack Tallarday and his men saw a group coming toward them on a hedgerow not long after they landed. Tallarday snapped his toy cricket twice. The Americans all had them. 2 clicks were supposed to be answered by 1. He thought he heard the answering click, but as they got closer, it was evident the other group was German soldiers. Cornelius Ryan, in his definitive book, The Longest Day, relates that there and then happened one of those curious events of the war, 2 groups silently walking past each other in a kind of frozen shock. No shots fired, and they blended into the darkness as if they never existed. Our whole country watched and waited that day, and the president offered up a public prayer.
Almighty God, our sons, pride of our nation, this day have set upon a mighty endeavor.
In New York City, Macy and Lord & Taylor shut down. Baseball games and horse racing were called off. At a Brooklyn shipyard, welders knelt on the decks of Liberty ships they were building and recited the Lord's Prayer. Church bells rang nationwide. In Philadelphia, they rang the Liberty Bell. In Columbus, all traffic stopped at 5:30 in the evening, and people prayed in the streets. On the other side of the world, over the coast of France, here came the bombers and fighters, 11,000 of them. The bombs were supposed to fall right on the invasion beaches and were to soften up things for the troops who were coming in.
I thought I could see 1,000 planes at one look, and commented, not altogether facetiously, one could walk from England to France on the backs of the planes.
And the bombers were backed up by 6 battleships, 20 cruisers, and 8 destroyers also shelling the beaches. But many of the bombs fell as much as 3 miles from their targets. It also meant that cover of bomb craters wouldn't be there when the troops came ashore. Most of those troops headed to that awful ordeal were green, never before tested in battle. Out at sea, it was rough. Soldiers' legs were crushed between ships and the lurching landing craft they were trying to board. 17 of the landing craft, carrying over 500 men, sank in high waves before making the beaches. Many of the troops drowned as they bailed fruitlessly with their helmets. All the artillery sank as it was being offloaded. Only 5 of the tanks that were supposed to float actually did. And many of the troops were seasick before they ever hit the beach. When the landing ramps opened into the jaws of hell, they often weren't on the beach, but in waist or neck-deep water, many of them carrying enough equipment to make them weigh 300 pounds. Waiting for them, a shoreline laced with trenches, pillboxes, landmines, gangly obstacles that they called Rommel's asparagus. So the German commander, who wasn't even in Normandy when the assault came, he had gone home for his wife's birthday. One beach they would eventually call Bloody Omaha. It became a meat grinder as the Allied air and naval bombardments couldn't knock out the German defenses. The first assault teams slogging ashore walked right into the carefully planned fields of German fire. They took nearly 50% casualties. In all, there were 4,649 dead or wounded among the 55,000 men who landed at Omaha. Many of the more than 2,000 Americans killed on that coast died without firing a shot. The lucky ones had to struggle to the beach through a sea turned foaming red by the carnage. 10 miles away was Utah Beach. The tide swept the landing craft 2,000 yards south of their intended area there, luckily to a weak point in German defenses. They got ashore with relative ease. One of the first officers to land there, 57-year-old Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt, the only general to land with the first wave, he had insisted on the assignment. One soldier remembers seeing the son of the former president walking about with a cane and map in hand as if it were a trip over some real estate. When a shell would burst nearby and send showers of sand in the air, it seemed to annoy Roosevelt, who would brush himself off impatiently. To the east, British troops took the beaches they called Gold and Sword. Canadian troops took one in between, codenamed Juno. The fighting raged for 4 days before the Allies could consolidate their hold on the beachfront. Individuals taking the initiative improvised new plans, made it possible to break through the Nazi defenses. The Allies built port facilities on the spot, sinking expendable ships to make breakwaters. Giant floating piers they called mulberries were brought into the beaches to handle cargo. And Allied planes roamed far inland, preventing any decisive counterattack by the Nazis. Within 10 days of D-Day, 1 million men and 500,000 tons of materiel had been landed in Normandy. It took almost another year for the Germans to surrender, but surrender they did. Roosevelt's arsenal of democracy in the end simply overwhelming the opposition. To all of those who were part of it and came home to tell us the tales, and for those who paid the ultimate sacrifice in the horror of the beaches, at the sea, and in the skies, we must promise never to forget what happened there 50 years ago along the coast of France on what they call D-Day.
We're recovering our B-25s, A-26, C-47s. And you'll notice lined up in front of you what it can only be called a gaggle of AT-6s, Harvards, and SNJs, as we prepare for another tradition here at the National Warplane Museum. And that is the flight of the T-6s, as we'll refer to them for the sake of simplicity. Let me explain. When the aircraft was used by the Army Air Force, it was known as the AT-6 Texan. However, when it was used by the Navy, it was known as the SNJ. It is an advanced trainer, used in the same role by both. Up in Canada, they were called the Harvard. Early in the war, for most of the world, the United States was still neutral, and these airplanes were being produced by North American here in the United States. And because of the neutrality laws, could not be flown to the Canadians across the border because we were supposedly neutral and they were already in the war. So what they did was they flew them up to the border, landed, and towed them across, and that was permissible. That's how some of the early Harvards got there later on. Of course, they were built in Canada. One of the things you will notice about the AT-6, we'll just call them the T-6s a lot of the time, because around 1948, the AT, PT, and BT designations were dropped in U.S. Air Force training as it became the U.S. Air Force, and they simply used T for trainer for all trainer types. So if you hear us referring to it as the T-6, it's because a lot of the time in its life, believe it or not, it was known as just the T-6. They have a very distinctive sound about them, as you will see. And that's because the prop tips on the airplanes at speed are just about supersonic, and they make a very loud buzz, the one you heard a while ago. It is not the 600 horsepower engine doing that, but rather the prop tips, which are close to being supersonic. The AT-6 is a very heavy airplane for a trainer. 5,200 pounds or 5,600 pounds could be the maximum load, although most of them do not weigh that much in the kind of regime that you see them in here. A number of them do have smoke systems on them. It's a fully aerobatic airplane. You can flip it and flop it everywhere. And the interesting thing about flying in this airplane is that unlike some airplanes where the wings flex and things, nothing moves in this. It's kind of like riding through the air in an aluminum Frisbee. It sails along real good, but it doesn't seem to move a whole lot in terms of flexing about. Sturdy airplane, I guess the best way to say it. Something on the order of about 15,000 AT-6s were made during the course of their lifetime. Still quite a number of them fly today. We're very pleased to have all of these here. Something else you may not know about these World War II aircraft, and that is that the federal government here in the United States does not in any way fly, own, or support flying historic aircraft, with the exception of a few in the Army. So even though you see them here in their World War II military markings, they are all either owned by individuals or by museums, not supported by the government in any way. way down the line. What do you think about that formation? Was that beautiful or what? You betcha. Now they're going to have to go out somewhere and turn that around. And they ought to get that finished somewhere out around Cleveland, and then they'll head back and make another pass later on. I'd like you to meet Lauren Lee, who's going to tell you about the Canadian Harvard Aircraft Association. Lauren, here you go, huh?
Thanks, Bill. How you doing, everybody? You having a good afternoon? All right, sounds good. And we're going to see some formation work by the Canadian Harvard Aircraft Association. 6 airplanes in formation. And they're going to start off with 2 Vics. This is a very basic formation. 2 arrowheads, or 2 triangles, with 1 aircraft in the front, 2 flanking it, and then another set of 3 aircraft behind it. The Harvard Association is known for its precision formation flying. This is not trick flying, this is not aerobatics, it's discipline, attitude, professionalism, and precision. Here they come from right to left across the show sign, the Canadian Harvard Aircraft Association in the double Vic. Cast your eyes a little bit further to the right, you're going to see Mr. Harvard, Norm Beckham, as he pulls up into a loop with the smoke on. If you've ever had the privilege of taking a ride with an aerobatic pilot, you may have noticed that you get jolted around a tad. As a passenger, that is. Your head goes bang, bang, bang against the canopy. Well, if you're ever sitting out at a little airfield in Woodstock, Ontario, which is where this airplane at Show Center right now is based, and Mr. Beckham comes up to you and offers you to maybe sit in the back seat for a while he goes up and plays, do it. You could rest a glass of water on the front dash and it would not spill a drop. Norm's aerobatics are so smooth, it really is incredible to be a part of. Norm's going to take it up over at the west end of the field, turn the airplane over on its back, and come back down in front of us again. Formation, the Canadian Harvard Aircraft Association. The Harvard Association is probably one of the more unusual associations in North America, in that it does offer to qualified pilots flying in a non-military setting, despite the fact that we use all the RCAF standards and syllabus, and we train our pilots to RCAF standards. But it's also one of the few places in North America where one can actually have the opportunity, if you are qualified as a pilot, to learn how to fly one of these historic aircraft. It's a very expensive proposition to run one of these things. Let me give you some numbers. These are Canadian funds, by the way. Try $180 an hour. That's just for the fuel, the oil, and a little bit of tucked aside for maintenance. At takeoff power, a Harvard is burning 56 gallons of fuel every hour. That's a gallon of fuel a minute. And up in Canada, it costs about, $3.50 Canadian for a gallon of fuel. And there he goes up again into the second half of the Cuban 8. Just wanted to say one other thing, and that is the Harvards that you've seen today, flying today, as a symbol and reminder of all those who made the supreme sacrifice for Canada, the United States, for freedom during the Second World War and before it and after it. And we want to thank you for the privilege of appearing before you today. If you see us wandering by, we got these maple leaves on our shoulder. Stop by, have a chat. Do come down and say hello to the airplanes as well and the ground crews that are taking care of them. And I do hope you have a really safe day. Enjoy the rest of the show, and I'll give you back to Bill. Thanks very much, folks.
How about a big hand for LJ, Lauren Lee. Fine job, Lauren, as always. Not only that, it gives me a break. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Mike DiMarino is flying Bob Pond's Planes of Fame P-38. This airplane is from Eden, Minnesota. Eden Prairie, Minnesota? Okay, I accept that. On the roll. Here we go. Pull back on the stick, make the houses get smaller. There you go. The aircraft taxiing in front of the announcer stand right now at the PV-2 Harpoon. Big airplane. That's powered by two R-2800 Pratt & Whitney engines. Up to 4,000 pounds of bombs that thing can carry. They use it for marine use, for hunting submarines. Sir.
You can buy one of these airplanes.
Okay, we are getting ready, or should be shortly, to launch our Navy planes. The Harpoon for sure is out there. I don't know what is doing, but while that's happening, here they come again in the T-6s, SNJs, and Harvards. It's buzz time, the world's most efficient machine for converting gasoline to noise.
This would be their brake right, You'll notice their gear will come out. They pop their gear out, come back around for their downwind base leg, and land. One more interesting fact about that PV-2 Harpoon, that is one of only 3 still flying in the United States of America. A lot of them were converted over to executive use for executives of big companies in the early 50s. They emptied them out and put couches in them and luxury chairs, a lot of upholstery, painted them up pretty. Because they were so fast, they made a great cross-country airplane with a lot of room inside.
And Kenny coming on out to join in the Navy flight, and we're really glad to see her because, as I said earlier today, the volunteers here worked very, very hard, our mechanics, in getting this airplane ready to put on demonstration today. Very rare on the Warbird circuit today. The PBY Catalina.
Bill, the wingtips are broke. Look, they're hanging down.
Yeah, they didn't get everything fixed, I guess, because those part of the wingtips is... No, actually, that's not true. Those things that are hanging down at the end of each wing are, in fact, the wingtips when the airplane is in flight, as you will see. But what they're for is when they land in the water, they would help stabilize the aircraft. They're like pontoons, and once the airplane is flying and back in the air again, they retract them electrically, and they become the very tips of the wings. A wing that's 105 feet long. A couple of 1830s, Pratt & Whitney 1830s powering the airplane. 1,200 horsepower max aside. It is not a particularly fast airplane because of all the things that hang down under that wing, including the fuselage.
Bill, I think you know because you've done this. If you get in that airplane and sit in either seat and you're going to steer it around the sky for a while, it's kind of akin to driving a big bus with 4 flat tires. Everything is an effort. The airplane has a lot of control pressure to turn right, turn left, and nothing happens fast. If you want to roll it to a left turn, you kind of give it one of these to the left, and pretty soon the airplane catches up to you, and then you want to go to the right.
You got to go the other way, yeah. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to hold off on the Navy flight. I'm going to turn you over to Captain Todd Jacks, who's with the 94th Fighter Squadron at Langley. A man who flew 28 combat missions during Operation Desert Storm for the F-15 demonstration. Captain Todd Jacks.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Wings of Eagles 94. I'm Captain Todd Jacks of Air Combat Command's 1st Fighter Wing, and it's my pleasure to be describing this afternoon's flight demonstration by America's premier air superiority fighter, the McDonnell Douglas F-15 Eagle, an aircraft whose combat role is to take control of the skies and to keep it. It's a mission our Eagles and their pilots accomplish with dash and dedication during Operation Desert Storm. The Eagle first joined the Air Force as an operational fighter in January of 1976. A later model, the F-15E, came on board in 1989. This newer aircraft is a dual-role fighter, designed for precision, all-weather ground attack as well as air-to-air combat. The original Eagle is now some 18 years old, but a series of improvements over the years has enabled it to keep its talent sharp. It certainly has not lost its ability to meet and defeat any potential adversary flying today, and today's flight demonstration will show you just what I mean. At the cockpit controls this afternoon is Captain Jeff Kendall, a veteran Air Combat Command fighter pilot with more than 1,900 hours in the F-15. And that time includes some 48 combat missions in Operation Desert Storm and Southern Watch. The Eagle is powered by 2 Pratt & Whitney engines, together producing some 50,000 pounds of thrust. That's more than twice the horsepower of the entire starting lineup at this year's Indianapolis 500. And with the Eagle weighing in at just over 38,000 pounds, it enables the F-15 to accelerate through the speed of sound while climbing straight up. The F-15 was designed and built for air-to-air combat, and it carries everything it needs to get that job done. In addition to a 20mm cannon, it can fire 8 radar-guided or heat-seeking air-to-air missiles. Its dual-role variant has been modified to carry a wide range of precision-guided munitions, the same munitions you saw delivered with such accuracy during Operation Desert Storm. Both the F-15 with us today and the E-model are equipped for in-flight refueling, giving them the global reach they need to rapidly deploy anywhere in the world. In fact, during the initial stages of Operation Desert Shield, F-15s from Air Combat Command were the first combat aircraft to arrive in the Middle East, departing within 24 hours of initial notification and flying some 7,000 miles nonstop. That's the equivalent of flying from New York to Los Angeles, back to New York, and once again back to Los Angeles without even landing. What's even more amazing about the plane and the people who fly and maintain it is that our deployed Eagles were in the air flying combat air patrols within 20 hours after arriving in the Middle East. During the 42-day war, our F-15 shot down some 31 world-class fighters without receiving a single scratch. In fact, the aircraft Captain Kendall is flying today is credited with downing an Iraqi Mirage F-1 the opening night of Operation Desert Storm. We've watched the F-15 perform high-speed, high-G maneuvers to test the mettle of both pilot and plane. But slow-speed controllability is just as important to those who fly. Captain Kendall will now demonstrate the F-15 slow-speed handling characteristics by decelerating for the low and slow pass in the landing configuration. While the F-15 is a top performer at more than twice the speed of sound, watch how precisely it handles as it's rolled from side to side during the slow-speed pass. From slow flight, Captain Kendall will pull up into a difficult maneuver called the Cuban 8. Tracing a figure 8 while on a steep climb, Captain Kendall will demonstrate how quickly the F-15 can transition from low speed to high speed maneuvers. 1975, the F-15 set a world time to climb record by soaring beyond 12 miles in just 2 minutes and 3 seconds. Since that record was established more than 19 years ago, it has yet to be broken. That's American quality in aviation, a quality that's lasted for more than 19 years. Captain Kendall's next maneuver will show you what a high-speed vertical climb looks and sounds like. He will pass at 500 feet, pull up into a vertical climb made possible by two superb engines powering the world's greatest fighter. Captain Kendall is now approaching the field for his final maneuver before departing, a high-speed pass. Captain Kendall and the F-15 East Coast demonstration team would like to dedicate this pass to all the men and women who keep the warbirds, past and present, in the air. And now a high-speed pass from right to left at more than 550 miles per hour. Captain Kendall will land at Niagara Falls. The 40-mile trip will take him just over 4 minutes. He will fly his final approach to landing at 150 miles per hour and touch down at 130 miles per hour. And now, on behalf of the commander of Air Combat Command, General John Michael Lowe, thanks for being with us today. I would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Ladies and gentlemen, a big hand for Captain Todd Jackson, our demonstration pilot in the F-15 Eagle, here at the Wings of Eagles Air Show, and we still have a whole lot to go.
If you notice at the east end of the runway, just to the west of the numbers 28, is the Corsair getting ready to depart. I believe that is Peter Tchaikovsky, Canadian Warplane Heritage.
And listen to sound once again of that R-2800.
14-foot diameter on that propeller. That's a lot of metal swinging out there.
This, by the way, is one of 3,800 Corsairs that were built by Goodyear. It's an FG-1D. Pete Gutowski, who has a real job at flying for Air Canada, as a matter of fact. Now in the takeoff role is Paul Herr and the Harpoon known as Hot Stuff. Paul Herr is from out in Indiana.
And our own PBY Catalina on the roll. Tom Hamlin, a museum member, who's got a typewriter in his airplane, along with Dennis Cristiano in the right seat. Tom's our pilot for the airplane today.
Airplane back through is going to be our Corsair, Kenny, if we get him around the turn. I see him making the turn inbound now. Most of the Corsairs were built by Vogt, and most of you probably know them by that name, the F4U Corsair. Prototype first flew in 1940. Here comes that Corsair. What a distinctive shape, and what a hauler it is. Making a little strafing run there.
Those 50 calibers giving the old guys out there something to think about. The reason for the wings being bent on that airplane, the gull-wing design, it really wasn't designed in the airplane to have anything to do with the flying characteristics. It was incorporated into the aircraft to get the propeller more clearance for aircraft carrier landings. It raised the fuselage up to get more clearance for that 14-foot propeller. And a Harpoon on a bombing run. Let's see if he drops anything. Bomb bay door open, no politician. Gotta hate it.
There you were. Couldn't find anybody wanting to do that, I guess. In the Pacific during World War II, Corsairs shot down 2,140 enemy planes and lost just 189 of them. That's an 11-to-1 ratio. And that's a ratio that was not matched by any other prop-driven fighter. Here comes the museum's old PBY Catalina. Lights on, little casters hanging out under it there. That's just in case it gets too low over a pickup truck or something. He won't, smack into it. It'll just roll right over. No, that's not why. It's just landing gear down.
A little bit of popcorn out of the Catalina. One of the interesting things that my protege up here brought up, Mr. Arnold, is that airplane does not have any flaps. The reason they designed no flaps into these airplanes is because they use the world's longest runways, the ocean. Consequently, they didn't need to slow down before they landed.
You notice on the wings of that Corsair, there are on each wing 3 places where there's like a yellow spot there. That was where the guns were mounted, and what they did was they taped the guns over before they went out on a mission, and if there were holes in it when they came back, they knew for sure that they had been fired, and it would help confirm claimed kills.
I thought they did that to keep the bugs out.
Well, I actually did that too, yeah.
Always playing the bugs out the
was to keep
windshield.
the BBs from rolling out of the gun, yeah. Once again, that harpoon, that's one of only 3 harpoons that still fly in the whole world. Despite quite a number of them having been made. About 10 flying B-17s in all of the world. 12,700 aircraft of this type were built during World War II. There are only about 40 or 50 known to exist in any condition today. Unfortunately, the museum's own B-17 named Fuddy Duddy was undergoing some maintenance. Major wing repair had to be made. Almost ready to fly today, but not here on the ground. But we are very happy to have with us today in the lead ship David Taluscher's Memphis Belle. This is the airplane that flew in the recent movie Memphis Belle, owned by David Taluscher from Anaheim, California. And coming along behind him, now David's is an F model, by the way. And while it has the top and bottom turrets, it does not have the chin turret, which you'll notice on Texas Raiders, which is the second B-17 coming along in the line. The Texas Raiders, of course, from the Confederate Air Force at Midland, Texas. Houston, Texas, it's based.
There are among us here today many who know too well the tragedy of making war. We have introduced you to some of them earlier. Veterans of bombing missions at altitudes where the temperatures could be 45 below zero. Nothing between you and that hostile environment but a thin skin of aluminum. And in that environment, they literally fought for their survival and for that of future generations. They also witnessed the death of many friends who gave up their futures so that others might have one. Beneath their path to the enemy targets were the ground troops and those at sea, in a no less hostile environment because war is, after all, that total absence of sanity, the worst that mankind can visit upon itself. Now, some would have us ignore all that. They say that we should put it behind us. There is no doubt they say remembering, but experience shows we're doomed to repeat history if we forget it. So it is that the National Warplane Museum, to honor all those who've served in all our wars and to keep history alive for all generations, presents the flight of the heavy bombers.
One of our planes was missing, 2 hours overdue. One of our planes was missing with all its gallant crew. The radio sets were humming, they waited for a word. Then a voice broke through the humming, and this is what they heard. Coming in on a wing and a prayer. Coming in on a wing and a prayer.
Watch them, Scotty. They have sights on them. 250-17, south, red cloud. 10-30 coming around. 10-30 up real hard. B-17 out of control, stand by. Boy, you guys get out of there. Bail out. Why didn't he come out of the bomb bay? Yeah, I see him. There's a tail gunner coming out. Watch out for fire. Keep your eye on him, Bill. See any parachutes wheeling? So far, you're 9 and 5. Though there's one motor gone, we can still carry on. B-17. Come on, the rest of you guys.
It was September of 1985 when a prison guard in Springfield, Missouri saw the B-17 named Sentimental Journey fly overhead. The experience prompted Ivan Fail to write the poem, Tribute to a Queen. From Guadalcanal and the Philippines at the start of World War II to the hostile skies of Europe, through miles of flak she flew. At home at 30,000 feet, majestic as a queen, a silver bird, flown by men, many in their teens. She carried war to the tyrant's lair to keep all nations free, and she flew through flak and flame as far as the eye could see. She slugged it out with Hitler's best, brought her dead and wounded home. Damaged and with engines out, that was oftentimes alone. Born of war, but seeking peace, she carried valiant men into the very jaws of death and brought them home again. Berlin, Frankfurt, and countless others, courageous daylight raids. And only God in heaven knows the awesome price she paid. She met death at 30,000, or on a treetop run, a victim of the Ack shell or the Luftwaffe fighters' guns. Like all the men who flew her for peace and hope, she yearned. But far too often, mission boards read, failure to return. Often plane and crew went down in a hostile place and others were missing in action, lost without a trace. Her era is in the past, but the history that she's made must always be remembered and never be betrayed. Generations have come and gone, enjoyed their hopes and dreams, and yet never paused in gratitude to this aging Silver Queen and to the men who flew her. Heroes, every one, who stood between our nation's shores and the tyrant's mighty guns. Yes, she's tired and weary, a little aged and worn, but she fought and bought their freedom before most of them were born. And we who still remember Tojo and Hitler's dream stand a little prouder in the presence of the Queen. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the best reason they did what they did and why we do what we do at the National Warplane Museum, as explained by the voices of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir.
Oh,
Okay, look to your left. John Ellis drawing a beat on the flight line, coming back through with the Tiger Cat. You watch, you listen, so will I. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it first occurred at the High on Kalamazoo Air Show in 1985 and is now a tradition that the Kalamazoo Aviation History Museum and the United States Navy join forces to present the historic flight of the Grumman Cats. This flight spans more than 50 years of U.S. naval aviation fighter aircraft, as each was called upon to defend the cause of freedom. The first pass over the spectator area dedicated to the men and women of the United States Navy and Marine Corps who flew and maintained these aircraft to preserve our way of life. That you see demonstrated right now on the C-130 is one that is often used on landing on a short field. By hammering those props up into reverse, the airplane can stop in a very, very short space. (132-foot wingspan, 97, almost 98 feet long. Maximum weight that it can take off with is 155,000 pounds, and 47,000 pounds of that can be cargo. It could be 92 troops, 64 jumpers, or 74 litter patients. Although they're usually not armed, there is a version of this that's called the AC-130, a gunship. That's armed with 20 and 40 millimeter cannons, a 105 howitzer on the side, and 7.62 miniguns. It is called the Spectre. They could pour out an incredible sheet of fire out the side of this airplane, decimating anything on the ground. The F-14 Tomcat, a pair of F-110 turbofans with afterburner. The airplane, with its wings at 60-degree sweep, as you saw it out there, has a wingspan of, with its 60-degree swept back, only has a wingspan of 38 feet, 64 feet when they're full forward as they are now. Big airplane, 40,000 pounds empty, fully loaded, 74,000 pounds. He's not flying that heavy here today. Of that 74,000 pounds, it's 14,500 pounds of weapons. 4 to 8 AIM air-to-air missiles, 4 Sparrows, or 4 to 8 Sidewinders, plus a 20 millimeter Vulcan cannon. 1,544 miles an hour, Mach 2.3, and yet for carrier landings, can get right down to 120 knots. The F-14 Tomcat first flew in 1970 and went into service just 2 years after that. It is carrier-based, a twin-engine fighter plane with variable sweep wings that can be controlled either manually or by a computer to match the speed. As we told you, there are 2 people in the crew, the pilot up front, radar intercept operator in the back. Its weapon system is so sophisticated it can track and attack 24 targets at once, automatically selecting the best weapon to go with each target. In this pass, if you look out behind the aircraft, right under the bottom of the aircraft at the back, you'll see the tail hook hanging down, you'll see the landing gear down, everything out dragging, low, slow, and dirty. You're going to get a demonstration of the power of this airplane, I have a feeling, here directly. Right around in there, about 125 knots. You'll hear him playing with the throttle to hold that speed. Oh, my word, I don't believe it. Ladies and gentlemen, is that something or what? Now that's a show-off. That was absolutely and totally unplanned by us. That has got to be the hottest airplane that has ever hit this airport and probably ever will. You ought to smell the tire smoke right here at Show Center. In all the years that I've been doing air shows where this guy is not supposed to be able to get on the ground, that's the first time I've ever seen one of them do it.
We have new information for the Batavia Airport Information Manual.
You can do a touch and go on an F-14 Tomcat. Wow. I have to go out now and get my heart restarted. I was looking at him saying, my God, he looks like he's going to land. It's like, nah, he wouldn't do that.
He's right
there,
ladies and gentlemen.
Yeehaw! He just took the elevator home.
I have an FAA monitor up here. It's just going out of his mind.
My name is Bill Lau.
I'm Ken Moses.
And on behalf of the National Warplane Museum, thanks for joining us. We'll see you at the air show.
Good night, everybody. Thanks a million.